So, hi everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of We Are Sunderland with myself, Scott Wilson, and Dom Shaw, coming to you as usual in association with our partners, the Fans Museum in Sunderland and Cospex Opticians. Good to have you with us. Dom. So international break just about over. Obviously, Sunderland getting back to it with a home game against Millwall this weekend. We'll have a good chat about that later on in the show. We'll look at what that might bring. We'll have a bit of a talk about where Sunderland are at in the rest of the season. But let's start with the international break. And obviously the big headlines from a Sunderland point of view in the break are injuries. Specifically, Dennis Cirkin, who was meant to join up with England under-21s for the first time, but didn't. He'd obviously suffered something of a hamstring problem in the defeat to Coventry that preceded the break. So he is now an injury doubt. And then in the last, 24 hours or so, we've also learned that Trai Hume now has an injury issue. He played in the first Northern Ireland game, which was against Switzerland. He then pulled out of the squad that's due to take on Sweden. We're recording this, I'll just let you know, on Tuesday morning. Northern Ireland playing tonight, but Hume won't be playing in that game. And Michael O'Neill, interestingly, in his pre-match press conference said, yeah, Hume is injured. He's got a hip issue. He's actually had it for a while. He had it prior to coming to the camp. He hadn't been taking part in full training with Sunderland. He was complaining of fresh pain in his hip after that first game. So we thought we'd send him back to the club and they can investigate what's going on. I mean, it's a worry, isn't it? Hume, pretty much the only natural right back. Cirkin, in the absence of a lazy, who we know is out for the season, pretty much the only natural left back. You know, my social media was getting filled with kind of fans saying, well, this is just 2 years ago all over again. We're going to be going into the playoffs without a defence. Well, it might not be that serious. Clearly, when Register Briss speaks later in the week, we'll get a bit more of a handle on how serious these injury issues are. But clearly not ideal, is it?
No, I think the Cirkin one's probably more of a worry than the Hume one. I think it would have been more of a worry for Hume if this was a new injury. It's a friendly that Northern Ireland are playing tonight. You suspect, had that been a major qualifier, had that been an important game, given that he's been nursing this injury for a little while now and has been managed clearly at Sunderland, you wonder whether he'd have found a way to get through it. But given that he joined up with this issue, niggle, he played and felt sore after Friday, was it the first game? It's a friendly game. It probably suits everyone, really, doesn't it? Certainly Hume and Sunderland for him to get back and get treatment. Like, I might be way off on that. Let's see what Labrie says on Thursday. He might say, oh, yeah, but, Trai's got to be out for however many weeks. But I don't know. It kind of smacks, doesn't it? If Sunderland were well aware of this issue, clearly they wouldn't want it known that they're right back. They're only right back. That one of their best players and most consistent players is barely training and he's just getting through games. But I don't think you've been able to tell that from Hume's performance.
No. I mean, you haven't from his performance levels in a Sunderland shirt. I think that's absolutely right. But the fact that, again, we need to get a bit more information from Labrie, but kind of feels like Sunderland feel the need to manage him and almost wrap him up in cotton wool because they know he's the only option there. I mean, I agree with you. Had he broken down with an obvious injury halfway through the first game, yeah, that's a bigger worry. But I still think it's a worry that someone's only right back is effectively not able to train properly because they're having to be so careful. What it smacks to me is that if something does go wrong with the hip, then that's probably him out for the season. Hence why they don't want to, put him in for any kind of treatment or anything now, because you're not talking about just a few days.
And the other thing I would say on that, though, I completely agree with that, and we'll get to potential options. But again, speaking with hopefully an optimistic hat on, if it was that bad, would he have joined up?
Yeah, well, that's the other issue, isn't it? Yeah.
So I think this is probably just, and again, let's wait and see and hope. But you hear boxers, don't you, talk about after a fight, I had this niggle and that I had that niggle, but you very rarely get into the ring feeling fully fit without niggle or a problem. It's the same with every sports person,
Yeah.
isn't it? Every athlete, you kind of, getting rid of one. Best way to get rid of one niggle is often to get another one. And I suspect most players who've played the amount of football Hume's played at this stage of the season,
Well, have something.
yeah. Now that's not downplaying it. Clearly, there's an issue there. He's been sent back. He's not been deemed available or not been deemed fit enough to play in tonight's friendly. But let's hope that it's everyone just being sensible, really, rather than anything more. The problem is, as you say, you've got to be sensible, because if this is worse than kind of first feared, or if it gets worse, then what do Sunderland do? What do you think? If Hume was out for 4 or 5 games, what do you think Labrise would do?
Well, the nightmare scenario is Hume and Cirkin both being out, isn't it? If all of a sudden you haven't got either fullback for a run of 2, 3, 4 games, then that is a massive worry. I think if Hume is out, the most obvious fit is probably 09 to right back. Now, clearly, that really only works if Ballard's fit, and that's another moving part in this. Dan Ballard didn't join up with Northern Ireland at all. So, when is Ballard going to be fit? Because if you move 09 and Ballard isn't available, then it's either Hjelde or Sealt at centre-half, but then you potentially need one of them at left-back if Cirkin's not right. So, you're potentially looking at a scenario where if you haven't got Hume, Ballard, or Cirkin, then you've really literally just got 4 defenders, haven't you? You've got 09, you've got Sealt, you've got Metham, and you've got Hjelde. And that's your back 4.
And Sealt has played, how many minutes this season?
20 minutes.
And I know he can play right back, but he is a centre back who's covering at right back. He's not a right back, is he?
Yeah.
And given the importance of the games coming up, I know that there might not be anything directly on the line in terms of whether you're going to get in the top 6 or get an automatic promotion. We don't need to go over all that again. But still, the importance of building momentum, the importance of refinding some of the form from the earlier parts of the season, and the importance of the playoff games if this was to drag on, if issues were to get worse.
Again, I've seen a number of fans who kind of have been messaging us in and around this saying, should this have been addressed in January? Should a utility defender, if you like, have come through the door in January? There was talk in January, weren't there, of our Sunderland light? Do they need another body in to help cover across the back line? Now, the decision was clearly made no, but you are looking at it now thinking, well, to a certain extent, this was a situation that we all kind of knew might come.
Yeah, I remember asking Labrise, because there was so much talk about forwards, wasn't he, and attacking players. And Labrise was really open, wasn't he, about what he wanted in January, and certain type of forward, a certain type of midfield player. I remember saying to him, what about the defence? What about right back? Because that was the obvious area. Left back at the time, you had Cirkin, you had Hjelde who could play there, O'Nions played there. It didn't feel as pressing a need, did it, as right back? I guess the only difficulty from someone's perspective would have been like, what type of signing do you make? Because if you were going to go out and make a Premier League loan signing, then the chances are, if Hume stays fit, he's going to come in and not kick a ball, isn't he? Right back isn't really like a position like, a winger or a forward where you might choose to rotate it a little bit. And Hume, touch wood, ordinarily robust, plays week in, week out, consistent. So I can understand why they might have felt it was a difficult decision to make, and also felt that we do have the centre half options who could cover there. What about change of shape? Do you envisage you possibly do that at all? I don't personally, because
I don't.
Patrick Roberts is a right wing back. But
no, he's pretty wedded to the way that he plays Labrise, and when push comes to shove, Labrise is not going to change formation if Sunderland are in a playoff game, are they? In the biggest game of the season, he's not suddenly the type of head coach who's going to pull a rabbit out of the hat and say, so if you're not going to do it in the big games, then almost why are you experimenting in it with these next 8? I think with these next 8 games, if the situation that Sunderland are in with Trai Hume, I think it would be prudent that they've got to try somebody else at right back in these next 8 games. Now, like I say, I think probably the next cab off the rank would be 09, and you can make that move if Ballard is available fairly easily, and you're not disrupting things very much at all. It's a much harder thing to do, obviously, if Ballard's not fit, but you'd like to think that Ballard will be fit at some point between now and the end of the season. So, I think that there clearly is some degree of an issue there with Hume. So I think Sunderland have to acknowledge that, and at some point between now and the end of the season say, right, well, let's take him out for a game, and what would we do if there was no Trai Hume?
Labrise tends to be pretty open, doesn't he, on injuries? So I think we'll get a good feel for it on Thursday when he speaks to the media for the first time on both Hume and Cirkin.
Yeah, and Cirkin obviously, like I say, is slightly different in that injury did occur in the Coventry game. I think there was hope initially that he would be okay to go at the under-21s. It was going to be his first call-up. So, again, that would give you a degree of hope that it's not especially, really serious. But clearly it hadn't healed sufficiently for him to do that and be able to do anything with the under-21s for those 2 games. So he'd have to be touch and go for the weekend, you'd think, at the very least.
Yeah, definitely. That feels like more of a fresh, well, clearly a fresh injury rather than the build-up of a niggle over the course of weeks, months, over the course of a season. Yeah. And the problem you've got is looking at the fixtures now. In an ideal world, Hume wouldn't have gone and joined up and have had a couple of weeks just to nurse the injury, to get treatment, a bit of rest and recovery. But then it goes back to probably what we were saying at the start. Well, if they really felt that he needed that, then would he have joined up anyway? But you wonder, just looking at those games across the bottom, Millwall home, West Brom away, Norwich away, given the Coventry game before the break, it doesn't really feel like it's an opportunity to say, right, we're just going to take you out for a week anyway and give you another chance. Does it? It's a tricky position to find themselves in, and Labrise finds himself in with Hume, isn't it?
Oh, it's a tricky position, full stop, because as we've kind of said on the last vid last week, that, in some respects, and fans won't want to hear this because they're paying good money to go to these games, and Norwich away, length and breadth of the country, fully understand all that. Ultimately, the results of these games are not going to determine Sunderland's season. They're not make or break. They are, however, going to become increasingly important in terms of building towards the playoffs if Sunderland aren't getting results in them. If Sunderland go and beat Millwall comfortably at the weekend, back to somewhere near their best, things are clicking again, then I think that all of a sudden then you can say, well, okay, that's drawn a line under what happened with Coventry. There is a bit of form there. If they then go and lose at West Brom, well, that's not a disaster. If all of a sudden they don't beat Millwall, they lose to West Brom, they don't beat Norwich, then you are within 4 or 5 games of a massive playoff semi-final in comfortably your worst run of the season. And that's clearly not a position that Sunderland are going to want to be in. So, while when absolute push comes to shove, it doesn't really matter if Sunderland beat Millwall at the weekend or not. Well, yeah, but at some point soon, this is going to matter because they're going to be in the playoffs and they're going to have to find a bit of form and a team selection that is, back to some kind of rhythm and basically everything that Sunderland haven't really been for the last few weeks.
Yeah, we talked about it last week, didn't we? Like, what's Labrise's best team now, and what he'd want to do ideally, and I know every manager would say this, but you'd want to go into the playoffs having been able to select that team, wouldn't you? You don't want to have to kind of mess about and make do for the coming few weeks. Clearly, at this stage of a season, you're always going to have some injuries to deal with, but what we've been talking about there is a completely rehashed defence, isn't it? Really, as you said at the start of the season, that this is how your back four might look come March, April, May. It's not ideal.
And then it's also players who are around and haven't been injured, but just aren't in their best form at the moment. Like, Wilson Isidore. Well, okay, Mayenda, he's justified his place in the team. He's done well, but I still feel that if you were picking Sunderland's best team for the first leg of a playoff semi-final, I would have Wilson Isidore in that team. Well, he needs to get a bit of form back and a bit of rhythm going. Chris Rigg, I fully understand why they felt the need to rest him. He played an awful lot of football, but all of a sudden, where's Riggs' format? Where does he fit in your best team? Mundle and Watson both coming back from injury. Both have looked a bit rusty, understandably so. Again, which one of them is your first choice, and how do you get a bit of rhythm and a bit of form into them? I think there are issues almost kind of all over the pitch where Sunderland's key players have just fallen out of a bit of form, and partly that could be tiredness, partly it's because they haven't been playing as much, and with your Rig, your Isidore. Partly it's because I'm sure Labris has wanted to try bits of things and see how other things work. But yeah, before the end of the season, I completely agree with you. In an ideal world, you want your best team back together for 2 or 3 games. Ideally, you win them, and then you're going into the playoffs in exactly the position you want to be in. If the playoffs were tomorrow, the first leg of the playoff semi-final was tomorrow, you'd worry a bit about Sunderland State going into it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'm just looking at Isidore there because you mentioned that Isidore feels like the type of striker now who'd benefit from Labris saying, you're starting the next 3 or 4 games, right? You've had your spell out now. You're refreshed. You're fully charged again. But now, no matter what happens on Saturday or on Tuesday or whenever, you're going to be in from the next 3 or 4 games. You can't really do that with Mayenda playing the way he has been playing, can you? But then looking at Isidore this season, his goals have come in spells. Really, he scored 5 in, was it 8 games between September and the start of November. Then there was the next spell of goals between the Blackburn game on Boxing Day and the Leeds game in early February, and he hasn't scored since then, 5-6 games since then. It feels like he'd benefit from a run in the team now. He certainly needs it, you would think. If Labris still sees Isidore as his first choice centre forward, then he certainly needs it at some stage between now and the end of the season, doesn't he? To go
I completely agree. I think, I know it can never be this clear cut because there will be injuries between now and the end of the season. There'll be players that have issues. There could be suspensions, whatever. Yeah, I get that. But I think Labris, and I think he will. I think, he will know that if a playoff semi-final was tomorrow, all things being equal, and I know to a degree it depends who you're up against and what style of play, all of that. Yeah, I get all of that. But who's your best 11? Who would be your go-to players? I'd still be surprised if it wasn't Isidore ahead of Mayenda, wouldn't you? In that scenario?
I would, yeah.
And from everything that he said, while he has played them together occasionally, he's always said 4-4-2, apart from in very specific circumstances. He generally thinks leads Sunderland undermanned at the heart of midfield and wouldn't be his preferred way of playing. So, again, I think it would be one or the other, and I think it would be Isidore.
Yeah, taking out the obvious unknown factors, and like you say, the element of, well, it depends who you're playing. But I think Isidore would start off Mayenda. I think it'd be Mundle on the left. I think it'd be Roberts on the right. The defence would pick itself if everyone was fit. Well, if all the centre halves were fit, it'd be interesting. Onai and Ballard or Meffam, isn't it? But then you've got Hume and Cirkin. I think Roberts on the right, Mundle on the left, Neil Bellingham. The one interesting one is Lafay and Rig. I suspect it'll probably be Lafay and Rig on the bench, but that's the one, I think, where you just wonder.
I think he'd want Lafay back in the team.
Yeah, I do.
Without.
Wouldn't he? I don't think there's anything about it. He would want Lafay back in the team. Yeah.
I mean, would it be completely out of the question that he'd go back to Lafay on the left? I know it seems strange when you've got Mundle and Watson.
Well, only last week he was talking about how it's really important to have the players on the left who play 1 versus 1, and he actually said Enzo's done a job there, but he doesn't play like he's not the type of player that we'd like on the left. I think it'd be Mundle on the left. The one
I think you're right.
rather than
it would feel like Rig would have to be the one who missed out then, wouldn't it? Unless you were going to play Rig wide right instead of Roberts, which he has done at times. And again, it's not your natural wide player in the way that Labris has been talking in that quote you just said there. But clearly, Rig probably gives you a bit of extra defensive capabilities on that side, and will come in and do what he does. So, yeah. I think basically though, I think you're right. I think Isidore will be nailed on. I do still think Job and Neil will play clearly. And then it's, 3 or 4 little bits around that, isn't it?
Just a couple of it on the subject of internationals. Mayenda, Spain under-21 debut last week. Some rise that really,
isn't it?
This is Spain we're talking about.
Yeah.
And this time
last year when he couldn't get a kick for Hibs, isn't it?
Couldn't get a kick for Hibs.
Get a game.
Yeah, and we've talked about this at length. We'd seen promise, and Tony Mowbray had talked to us on and off the record about the promise and the potential he'd seen there. But as we've said previously, I think only a couple of weeks ago we did a video. You wouldn't have predicted he was going to be a leading forward for a team challenging for automatic promotion for long stages of the season. Credit to him and Labrise and the coaching team, I think, for how much he's come on this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we've kind of said feels like Isidore will still be your number one, the fact that Mayenda has made it a question and made it a debate, that speaks volumes for him as well. The fact that he has played so well, because even in the early stages of the season, I think we were saying, well, there's definite signs of improvement there, but I'm still not sure he's a 9. I'm not sure you can play him through the middle. Well, he's answered that because he's delivered some really, really good performances as a 9. So, as we've kind of said previously, from a situation in the summer where you were wringing your hands saying, well, once again, Sunderland haven't got a centre forward, they've arguably got 2 of the top dozen in the Championship, haven't they? I think you'd definitely say that.
And the other international I was going to mention, Nectar Trai was called up to the Hibs senior team for the first time. Now, he's obviously had a really good season again at Hibs, where he's hugely popular there. He's obviously been reinvented into this holding midfielder. I'm sure I'd seen him read that the Australian fans are calling him the Aussie Rodri, which is quite the compliment. Anyway, while he was away, he was asked about his future, and he said, my parent club is Sunderland, but I've got a good soft place for Hibs because I've spent an extended time there on loan, now extending to 18 months overall. I've had a good time with Hibs. I just have to see in the summer what happens. That's another goal of mine, to be in the Premier League, the best league in the world. I think that's where all players aspire to be. That'd be a great thing for me personally, to get promoted in the Premier League. And from there, I'd have to work as hard as I can to earn a spot in that team. You would think he's got a couple of years left to run on his contract. Yeah. We asked Labrise about Triandis a couple of weeks ago, and Labrise was quite non-committal. But you would think, at the very least, Labrise would want to have a look at him in the summer, wouldn't you?
Well, you think so, wouldn't you? I mean, I know we're a little bit sniffy down here, and I know there are question marks about what exactly is the level of the Scottish Premier League. Yeah, I take that on board. But like you say, he's in and around the Australian team now. He's clearly been really, really popular and successful in terms of what he's done with Hibs. And a natural defensive midfielder is a position where Sunderland, haven't really. I know Alan Brown's come in, but he's not a sitter, is he? Dan Neil's done brilliantly in that role, but again, is a very different type of defensive midfielder than you would imagine Triandis would be. And from the little bits you've seen of Scottish football, looks like he is. I think he would definitely have the potential to add something to this Sunderland squad. Now, again, are we talking about a Sunderland squad in the Championship or in the Premier League? That's an issue. Are we talking about a Sunderland squad that's still got Job, Dan Neil and Chris Rigg in it come the start of next season? That's another issue. There's a lot of talking points, but it kind of feels like Sunderland might be missing a trick if they just write Triandis off straight away and say, right, well, let's sell him, let's cash in. You can do that and they'll make a profit, and that's not to be sniffed at. It's a success in terms of player trading and what you're doing there. But certainly if Sunderland are a Championship team again next season, it feels like Triandis would potentially have something to offer.
Just before we wrap up, you were over at the Academy of Light speaking to David Bruce.
Yes.
About counterfeit shirts. Just kind of fill us in. If you haven't read it, then on We Are Sunderland on the site, there's an exclusive on there. Scott spoke to David Bruce at the Academy. But yeah, fill us in. Give us
it came off the back of a few conversations that I'd just been having around the club on this issue, really. Partly I was looking at doing something maybe just on the wider issue of kind of counterfeit sporting goods and what it means to the clubs. And anyway, the chat with Sunderland led us to this interview with David Bruce. And I thought it was really interesting. I mean, think it comes from the starting point that I would be understanding, and I think to a degree, Sunderland as a football club will be. Look, I've got 2 kids. I know how much it costs to get kids sporting gear. I fully appreciate kids want the newest, the best sporting kit. If you're a parent with 2 kids who are Sunderland fans, it's going to cost you the best part of 120, 150 quid to get them fully kitted out in Sunderland replica kit each. You can get it off the black market with a very quick, very easy internet search, maybe 15 quid each. So I understand the finances. I understand why fans are being driven to do this. But I did think it was pretty stark when David Bruce is saying, we estimate that 1 in 15 replica tops in the Stadium of Light on a match day are fake. And that's fans who are, prepared to put their money where their mouth is and actually pay to go at the game. So if you're just talking about more loosely within Sunderland as a city and the Northeast as a wider region, it's probably even more than that. And that is costing the club hundreds of thousands of pounds every season, if not millions. And then on the back of that, David Bruce is kind of saying, as a club, we're fighting against this because we spend a lot of money on the design of these kits. We spend a lot of money on manufacture. This is dead money if people aren't buying it and the money's going elsewhere. But I think on top of that, what he's saying is we spend that money because we want the kids to be safe. We want them to tick every standard that's going. We want to know how they're made and all of this. And he's saying, look, if you're buying these fake kits, then they don't comply to any international standards. A lot of the ones that the clubs say that they've seen, and I have no reason to think that this wouldn't be correct, are flammable, are really dangerous if they're on young kids. This isn't just a Sunderland issue. There's been a lot of research into this as a wider issue within football. And I think it's, widely held that this isn't just a few dodgy blokes around the back door of a pub knocking out an odd replica kit. This is a £1 billion black market industry with very, very deep links to organised crime. And ultimately, if you're buying these kits, that's where your money's going. Now, I still do, and I put it to David Bruce, the counter, I accept all of that. The counter argument to that would be, well, why are kits so expensive? What are families meant to do? And he said, I understand the pressures, but ultimately, if we're going to make the kits the best that they can be, and we want them to be the best they can be, there is a cost to that. And we try to keep costs down where we can, but ultimately, this is really what it costs to produce a football kit.
Just finally, clearly Sunderland can get the message out there, but what can they actually do? Can they do anything about it?
Well, that's the thing, So what they said was that they're doing a couple of things. They're part of a kind of wider group that are looking at the global kind of networks of this. Where are these things actually being made? Not exclusively, but largely in the Far East. So can we shut these things down? How do we do that in terms of shutting down the manufacturing capability, in terms of shutting down how they sell them? Then there's also the more localized elements that are involved in this. So, while they might be manufactured in China or Taiwan, or I think some South Korea, that part of the world, largely, and that's not exclusively, but largely, they're still being imported into England. They're still being sold door to door in England. They're still being, advertised on social media, on internet sites in England. So what can they do around that? So Sunderland are working to do that. The other clubs in our region, Newcastle and Borough, are working to do that. Ultimately, it needs a much more joined up approach within the EFL and the Premier League and all the football authorities. And I think you're starting to see movement with that. David Bruce did say that this is an agenda item now. Every time that there's an EFL board meeting, counterfeiting is being discussed. You've obviously got the kind of pirate TV element to it, which is different, but in some ways connected. And I think the whole of football is waking up to the fact that clubs are now being hit financially by all of this. What can they do? But you're right. I mean, I think he described it as, he says, it's like whack-a-mole. You shut down one thing and another one just opens up 10 minutes later. So clearly that's the problem.
That as I say, if you haven't read that, and there's loads more detail in Scott's piece, that's on our site, We Are Sunderland, and you can still subscribe for just £1 for 6 months for there. The offer's running across the bottom of the screen there. So take advantage of that and read the piece in full with David Bruce. Let's wrap up then with the weekend and
Yes,
Millwall.
Millwall. Interesting game. I mean, Millwall are right, still banging it, aren't they? They're probably on the fringe of the playoff battle, but they're still part of the conversation. They'll very much be of the opinion that if they can come to Sunderland and win, that gets them right back in the playoff mix. Obviously, Alex Neil, which is another factor and element to that. I mean, we haven't heard a lot yet, but obviously Neil will do his press conference at the back end of the week, and I'm sure we'll be asked a lot about his time at Sunderland and the way that things finished up here. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because Alex Neil got Sunderland promoted. I mean, you know, he won at Wembley. He did what a number of his predecessors had been unable to do and actually got Sunderland out of that division. And then obviously very quickly at the end of the next summer and just at the start of the following season, things unravelled. And, you know, I think it had become pretty clear to us who were dealing with him through that summer that recruitment was becoming a major issue, that he just wasn't singing from the same hymn sheet as the way that Christian Speakman and Kirill Louis-Dreyfus were wanting to go. And that very, very quickly came to a head, didn't it? And he left, 2 or 3 games into the season? So
what's he like to deal with?
I always liked him. Yeah, I mean, you know, a little bit surly, a little bit straight talking, but not in a aggressive or nasty kind of way at all. You know, you asked him a straight question, he'd pretty always give you a straight answer. Becoming increasingly tetchy towards the end. And I think it was pretty obvious that was because he was just clashing with those above him. And, you know, he didn't necessarily feel able to say what he wanted to say freely. And then the few times that he did quite openly say, you know, what's going on with the striker was kind of, I remember that pre-season and we were asking him every time, are you any close to getting a striker? And then, you know, and I might be wrong. You mix games up in this job. I'm sure it was on the touchline at Valley Parade. I think they'd played Bradford in a pre-season game. And we asked him again about the striker. And he just said, it's no use asking me. Ask them. As in Speakman, Louis-Dreyfus. And by that point, you knew, God, this isn't working, is it? You know, this is now at the point where they're really, really not singing from the same hymn sheet in any way, shape or form. So I think you knew there were real issues there. I think it probably still at the very end unraveled faster than we probably envisaged it would. But I always liked him to deal with.
You mentioned there about that Millwall's playoff hopes. They're 6 points off. And of the games they've still got to play, they've got to go to Sunderland, obviously, Sheffield United and Burnley. It feels like there's not much room for error there. They're probably heading to Sunderland thinking we need a positive result. The other, I mean, they do play a lot of teams that are in and around them. They play Middlesbrough, they play Blackburn, they play Norwich. But they feel like long shots for the top 6, and it feels like they're probably a couple of bad results away from being out of it. I know we touched on it last week. I think it's a really important game for Sunderland. I think after Coventry and ahead of the West Brom and Norwich away games, it's probably not an awful time to play Norwich, really. They look about out of it, don't they? But we know West Brom, huge game for them, and the emotion attached to that game. I think it's a really important game, and I think Labrise will get a response out of Sunderland. I think they'll win.
Yeah, I think for all the Hume and Cirkin things are a big headache, I think the break did actually probably come at a good time for Sunderland. It enabled them to just move on from that Coventry game, draw a line under it and say, right, 8 games now, this is our running to get playoff ready. And if by some absolute miracle we end up in a genuine chance of finishing in the top 2, great. We'll see where that takes us. But you know, fundamentally now, this is an 8-game block where it's about getting ready for the playoffs. And I'm like you. I think if Sunderland have a positive performance and a positive result this weekend, it just means everybody can move on from Coventry, and all of a sudden it's right. Okay, let's start building towards the playoffs now. If it doesn't go well this weekend, then I think all of a sudden the alarm bells really do start. Not necessarily internally, but certainly I think within the fans. Partly, as I say, given because we know how things went 2 seasons ago when the things unravelled and you were going into playoffs with a threadbare squad and no kind of form at the worst time and all of this. I think if it was to be poor this weekend, then I think there would then be real questions of right, how can this be turned around now? Because it's starting to feel like this all of a sudden this season's getting away from us a bit. Whereas, like I say, I think if you go and win this weekend, get a bit of positivity back, then you can go to West Brom and Norwich and think, well, okay, the pressure's off to a degree because we've at least steadied the ship and we know we're still on the right track.
Well, I'm there this weekend, so we'll have full analysis, reaction as ever on We Are Sunderland over the course of the weekend. Build up as well from Thursday when Lebris speaks to the media at his press conference at the Academy. Do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening on your podcast platforms, then rate and review. And thanks, as we said at the start, to all partners, the Fans Museum in Sunderland and Cost Specs Opticians. We'll be back next week for another episode of We Are Sunderland. Take care.